So now I want to talk a bit more about causal reasoning. And one of the points I want to make about it is that our search for the cause of an event may depend on our interests. So if you imagine a car accident that took place on a bend, different agents, different agencies will have different interests. So for example, lawyers will want to know whether anybody was at fault, right? So that will be their question. Who, if anybody, caused this? Mechanical engineers will want to look at the car, right? Was there anything, any fault in the car or any way in which the car could be better? It's not necessarily a fault, but just, so for example, could the tyres be improved? Maybe the tyres were standard, but maybe standard tyres could be improved. Civil engineers will look at the road and the bend and the signage, and will ask themselves whether any of that could be improved, whether any of that was at fault. And the road traffic investigators will look at the conditions. Was it raining? Now, in the totality of the event, something about the driver, something about the car, something about the road, something about the conditions, all of these are present, but which one you focus on will depend on your interests, on the things you might hope to change in the future. Right? So it may not make any sense to talk about the cause of the accident. Similarly, I mean, most people have written the World War I essay, right? What were the causes of the First World War? Well, most people know something about Archduke Franz Ferdinand getting shot in Sarajevo. But people get shot from time to time, royalty and presidents and so on. And that doesn't always cause a world war. In fact, usually it doesn't. So there must have been something structural. And of course there was. There was the system of imperial alliances and various imbalances. I mean, you know how this goes. You would say something about British attempts to tie up Russia in treaties which the British then had to hold to, and German attempts to develop an empire to rival the British and the French, the weakness of the Ottoman Empire, and so on and so forth, right? So you will distinguish proximate and structural causes, right? So the proximate cause, proximity, nearness, the nearest cause, the thing that's closest in time, the trigger, is the shooting of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But the structural cause is the whole system of alliances and the various weaknesses and ambitions of the imperial states of Europe, including the Ottoman Empire. I want to say a word about argument by analogy. Analogy is another kind of causal argument, another kind of ampliative argument. So what's an analogy? An analogy is like a metaphor that you use for argumentative purposes. So if you think about Paley's watch, most of you, I think, will have heard of Paley's watch. So this is an argument that the universe must have been created by an intelligent designer. This is William Paley. Says, well, if you're walking on the beach and you find a watch, and you look at it and you look at the intricacy of the parts and the way in which they all fit together and the way in which one part pushes the next, the clockwork, where the clockwork all fits together. You think there must have been some creator, some very intelligent artisan must have created this thing. And similarly, if you look at the world, the way in which the animals' bodies have the same kind of intricate mechanism, only more so, right? Then there must have been a similarly creative and beneficent creator for the world, right? So that's Paley's version of the design argument. Now, Paley is arguing by analogy for a causal relation, right? He's saying, think of the world as an effect. There must have been a cause, and I'm going to tell you something about what that cause is like. And I'm doing that as a result of an argument by analogy that analogizes the world or the cosmos to an artifact such as a watch. Now, how do you argue against causal arguments by analogy? Well, one way you can do it is by taking the argument more seriously, more earnestly than the author did. So this is what David Hume did with Paley's argument. So Hume says, well, and he did this in the Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, which is a beautiful, beautiful book. He says, well, think of a ship, right? Think of the 18th century sailing ship, which is, you know, just about the peak of sailing ship technology before it gets replaced by steam. This is an immensely intricate machine. And you might think, on the basis of Paley's argument, that the shipwright must be some kind of genius to invent something as clever and brilliantly designed as the sailing ship. But of course, that isn't the truth at all. The shipwright isn't exceptionally, I mean, presumably the shipwright is a tolerably intelligent person, may be able to read, can certainly do basic arithmetic, but no kind of genius. Rather, the cleverness of the ship, the intricacy of the ship design, is a result of thousands of years of experience in building and sailing boats. And so if you take Paley's argument, and watches are the same, right? I mean, nobody sat down from nothing and invented clockwork, metal clockwork. What happened was you had centuries of people using cogwheels to do things like drive mills, you know, flour mills. You had things like water wheels driving flour mills, huge wooden cogs, and eventually that gets taken on into clock design, and the clocks get smaller and smaller, and the metallurgy to make clockwork didn't spring from nowhere. It took, you know, millennia of people improving metallurgy to the point where you could make clockwork, right? So generation after generation of artisans gradually improving techniques and materials eventually gives you clockwork and the watch. So if we take Paley's argument seriously, take his analogy seriously, more seriously than he did himself, what do we get? We don't get one genius creator of the world. What we get is generations of moderately intelligent deities, each one improving the efforts of the last. And of course, some watches are doff, some watches are badly made, some watches are made by apprentice watchmakers who haven't got the hang of it yet. So maybe this cosmos isn't the work of a master cosmos builder. Maybe this cosmos is the work of an apprentice. Maybe that's why there's you know, vast vast areas of the universe that are just empty, and there's just this one little corner that's got intelligent life. Maybe an apprentice just did this bit to show they could do intelligent life. Okay, so the way Hume, so Paley makes an argument, argues for a causal relation by analogy, and what Hume does is takes that analogy more seriously than Paley does, and that's how he ends up with a critique of Paley's argument. Of course, the fact that Hume has a critique of Paley's argument doesn't mean that Paley's conclusion is false. It's entirely possible that the cosmos is the result of a creative act by a single all-wise divinity, but Paley doesn't have a good argument for that. But just because Paley doesn't have a good argument for it doesn't mean it isn't true. We just don't know on the basis of the arguments that I've just given you. Okay, so that's some thoughts about argument by analogy. Take a moment now to think about some analogies that in argument, that are used in argument that you know about, and think about the causal relations that those analogies are trying to establish, and ask yourself whether you can criticize those analogies in the way Hume did with Paley's, by taking it more seriously, by being more flat-footedly literal-minded with it than the author of the analogy himself. And then in a moment I will say a few words about statistical reasoning.